Today I'm going to do something pretty fun. I'm going to try to play some Bach on electric guitar. And this is actually something I used to do all the time when I was back in music school. I actually have a degree in classical guitar, and I did play quite a bit of Bach. With classical guitar, it's more, finger style, lots of chords. It's a different technique completely from playing electric guitar, especially if I'm using a pick. So another thing that I would do a lot was I would go to my library at my university, the just main public library. They had a big section of sheet music there, and I would go and find sheet music for violin and for flute and cello, whatever. And I would try to play that stuff on the electric guitar as kind of a technical exercise, but also try to get myself out of my own instrument. So what I'm going to do here is I have Bach Violin Sonatas and Partitas. I've gone through some of these before, but I picked one here that I haven't gone through. This is the Allegro from Bach Violin Sonata number 3 in C major. And I'm just going to go through the first page. What I'm going to do is learn how to play this on the guitar. I'm going to tab it out so that I have all the fingerings, and then I'm going to attempt to try to play it. And there's a couple of things I want to do with this. One of the main things is obviously just kind of technical practice. Learning something that's not guitar-based forces me to do some fingerings I might normally think about. The other thing I might do is use it as a pure technical exercise. In this piece, there's a lot of legato, for example, but I might take this and treat it like a purely alternate picking exercise and decide to pick everything. But I think the most important thing that I want to do is try to get some ideas from this. So I might take a measure or two of this and turn it into an exercise, for example. I'll do something like that at the end of the video. And then also from a compositional perspective, I can look and see, okay, how is Bach writing for a violin in this case? And so if I go to write for a violin in some of my own music, I can think about the kind of patterns and the sort of interval jumps that are more common on a violin. As a guitarist, I'm often thinking as a guitarist when I'm writing, and I want to kind of get out of that mindset sometimes when I'm composing. So those are all things I'm going to try to do here as I learn this piece. I'm just going to go through the first page here, kind of get all the fingerings down, and then practice it up to a decent tempo. But the very first thing that I want to do is actually listen to some recordings of this. So I pulled up a few here on YouTube. Just kind of want to get an idea of how violinists are playing this piece, how fast they're doing it, some of the articulations, dynamics, that kind of stuff. So let's listen to this one. All right, and let's listen to this one here. This is Hilary Hahn, who's an incredible violinist. So for example, I noticed the difference between those two is Hilary's not pausing as much before each measure, and that's kind of just a musical decision in the case of both of these players. For me, I probably won't pause too much. I'm going to treat this more like a kind of straight exercise. I'm not going to do it like to a metronome necessarily, but I'm also getting kind of an idea of the speed that they're playing at here. This is probably about 120. It's pretty quick on guitar. So I'm going to shoot for somewhere around 120 beats per minute, I think. And if I was to learn this and try to perform it properly, I would listen to recordings all the way through, multiple recordings, try to get a feel for how the musicians are playing it. So in this case, we're in the key of C major here, and I'm just going to start looking at the sheet music. Now I have it here in actual music. I'll take a picture of this and put it up on the screen. I'm just going to go one measure at a time and try to figure out a good fingering. One thing I'm looking for here is kind of the overall range of this piece. The guitar sounds down an octave from where it's written, so this is going to sound down an octave from the violin, but it's actually in a good range guitar-wise. What I'll do is I'll show you how I'm doing the fingerings for maybe the first 8 or 10 bars, and then I'll do super speed and put the rest in here and tab, because you don't want to watch me do this for, half an hour or whatever it's going to take to kind of get all the fingerings in there. So let's take a look at the first measure. So we're going to start on a C. We're just going to go up a scale. I think that's a pretty good fingering, and I'll put the articulations in here in a minute, but it typically helps if you have the right time signature in here. This is in 3/4. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of starting to learn the patterns. So there's the first two measures. Let's see, this measure is the same as the first measure. Now let me put in some of the legato that's happening here. I'm going to try to do the articulations the same as they're doing on the violin, at least for now. I might choose to pick more of it, when the time comes. The articulations I can't necessarily do exactly like the violin all the time. I'm kind of keeping this 3-note per string thing for now. I'm trying to keep it all somewhat in the same range, right? And in this case, kind of 3-note per string stuff. So let me just go through this first 4 bars here. That's not too bad. Okay, good. Definitely something I can do up to speed. Some of these patterns are going to get trickier later, but there's the first 4 bars. Next measure. There's some of that classic Baroque pedal point stuff. And that's a pretty tricky fingering. And this is where it's starting to get maybe, outside of what the guitar would normally do. As I'm doing this, I'm kind of looking for patterns too. So this 7th bar is very similar to the 5th bar. So these 4 measures here that I just played, those actually repeat again. So that helps. I mean, Bach often doesn't have repetition, long periods of repetition, but there are some within pieces or within patterns. So sometimes I'll look for that too. So I'm kind of seeing these little patterns here as I'm going along. And I'll go back and double check as I'm doing this just to make sure I have all of the right notes in the right place. But I'm just getting it down for now. That's kind of a weird fingering for a guitar. A lot of this 10th fret here. This is doable. Maybe it works better on a different string. Like that. Oh, it might work better there. So, because you don't have the bar because of the tuning of the guitar. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So I'm actually going to shift this up a string. Okay, let's do a couple more measures and then I'll do the super speed so you don't have to watch me do all of this. What's the next part? I'm going to go that far. Some of this for me is obviously knowing my scale shapes to a certain point. And once I start playing one of these, I can see like, okay, this is a C major scale. This is a different kind of scale. So it goes straight down the scale. Because if something goes straight down the scale and I know what scale it is, because I've practiced all my scales, it makes it kind of easy to implement. Yeah, you know what, I'll do that just so it's a little more accurate. This thing about playing something that's outside your instrument is you get some weird fingering sometimes, that don't really make that much sense. Cool, so I'm just going to go through everything I've done so far here, and then I'll super speed through the rest here. Yeah. Already I'm kind of getting an idea of the parts that are going to be difficult to play, especially as I speed it up. Most of this isn't too bad, but I think it's a pretty good fingering overall. As I mentioned, I might adjust it kind of once I start playing it more if there's certain things that are being really difficult to play. I'm going to super speed through tabbing out the rest of this part, and then you'll see me in a minute. All right, so I worked all the way through this first section, figured out a fingering that's pretty good. It's up on the screen there. And what I'm going to do is just run through it a couple of times, try to figure out the measures that are going to give me a really hard time, and maybe isolate those from a practicing perspective. I've got it on Guitar Pro here. I'm just going to play along at like 60% speed. So the parts in here that are really tricky for me are towards the end of this, mostly because I was sight reading it was a bunch of it, but there's some weird open strings and just some bizarre fingerings, like this part here. That part, and then just those two measures back to back. That's something I should isolate a little bit. And it repeats. Yeah, it's very tricky. Then the next two bars, that's not too bad. There's some string skipping though. Yeah, it's not too bad. This is weird. Oh, jeez. It's a bad stretch. There we go. And then the next bar, I know this one really threw me off. It's actually not too bad. So those bars together. That's fine. And then this last part's tricky too. These four bars here especially. That's really tough. Yeah, so this whole last page, that's what I kind of need to go through. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes practicing this. It's Bach, so I mean, realistically, I'd probably, want to spend weeks doing this to try to get it to a place which sounded really good. But I'll practice this for another, 15, 20 minutes, maybe take a shot at it. And then maybe I'll talk about some exercises I might do from this. So I'm going to attempt to do a run through of this. I'm very much still sight reading it, but I'm going to do a musical approach where maybe I'm pausing here or there, just like some of the recordings we listened to, mostly so I can kind of get through this. I might have to pause here or there to remember where I'm at. If I was to do this properly, I would memorize all of it, and then I wouldn't have to be like staring at the sheet music, which is off kind of to the side here. So, but this is just me practicing after 15, 20 minutes. All right, so that's as good as it's going to get for now, I think. I definitely have an idea of how I'd want to go about kind of getting that up to speed. Maybe I'll do that at some point. This was more just an example of what I might do with a piece like this. Probably worth me practicing that. There's some stuff in there that would definitely benefit my playing if I did it. One other thing I did here was make a little exercise. You can see it on the screen, and this is built out of these two bars here. Basically, I'm just going to take this pattern, which is cool, all this. That's the pattern I took, and then I put it into this little sequence in E minor. Makes it sound a little darker. But basically, I'm just taking the same idea, and I'm going to create my own little practice sequence out of it. And it sounds like this slowly. This is an example of how I could take part of a piece and turn it into an exercise instead of just running scales all the time. And then another thing I could do is to do this with pure alternate picking, make it a different kind of exercise. There's some ideas for how I might approach learning a piece from a different instrument or from a different style of music, in this case, some Bach, and trying to figure out how to do the fingerings, figuring out some of the patterns, turning it into exercises. This is just a really good idea for musicians in general. Whether you're just a player or a composer, it kind of gets you in the mindset of getting outside of yourself, like getting outside of the kind of music I usually write, getting outside of the instrument that I play, trying to reach into something that's a little bit uncomfortable that can always push you forward. And I used to do this kind of stuff all the time. I haven't done it in a long time, and it sounds like I need to do more of it. So I definitely recommend doing this kind of thing. It's a worthwhile exercise. And if you want the tab for this Bach piece, let me know. Maybe I can make a PDF of it and send it out. I might practice this and put it up closer to the original tempo. I make no guarantees on that. My life is pretty busy at the moment. But if you enjoyed this kind of loose practice type of video, please let me know. I might do more of these in the future. And stay tuned for my next video. Till then, stay proggy.